"Why are you so frightened, you men of little faith?" And with that he stood up and rebuked the winds and the seas. The result is a great calm. Now, out of his wisdom as Logos came the laws of the universe. When something for us happens unexpectedly, we call it a miracle. It should not have happened. A miracle is a break in the sequence of cause and effect. When the author of the first cause, which leads to every effect, interrupts the sequence and places his own cause between some cause and effect, and it leads to something for us which should not have happened. We are actually right now about to handle that same power. The Lord is coming as King of this house, which he has set apart for himself, a family of prayer, where he reigns, and he's coming as a guest, and he's going, even though we will not see it, to command the elements once again. This is my body. At that point, something happens which the angels see, and it is for us, because we can't see it, called a mystery. But it is actually more. There is something happening ontologically, fundamentally, which is of the order of this miracle. He is coming physically and taking possession of a part of the earth. When he came, and when he comes, he brings this calm with him. Have you noticed that already by celebrating we got into mode? We had first of all there a moment of prayer, and then you had part of the rosary, and as I was resting I was saying the prayers of resting, and we came in not crashing into the beyond. There was already a calm which made us receptive, and that is part of the parcel. We have to do our bit, because if we don't, we will not get the fullness of the blessing. The graces will be reverberating from our soul, and the Lord will not have access because we're bombarding him with what we're carrying with us. But have you noticed too that in celebrating in a mode not just of saying words, but calmly celebrating in that mode of joy and song brings calm? It's not difficult to do, but it does give us a modality which is other. It is a notch higher than the saying and the banal and the daily. It's a language for God, cultivated over the centuries in East and West and in every part of the West, even actually by our separated brethren, and very well quite often. Now I want to attack that just for a second because it's kind of important stuff. We had a suicide in France some years ago, and a young man actually left a note, and he was talking to various categories of people that he had known and why he had done it. And he came out with this paragraph in French. I think one or two know a bit of French round here, don't they? And this was, "À vous les chrétiens, je dis." To you the Christians I say, "J'ai été enchanté par la beauté de vos évangiles. I've been enchanted by the beauty of your Gospels, mais effrayé par la laideur de vos assemblées, but terrified by the ugliness of your assemblies." So with words like that, he went into the beyond. Now, parallel to that, I was actually positively uplifted and surprised by what I was seeing in certain parts of France, because there was a very powerful renewal going on there in the 80s, and I was somewhat involved, not only in the monastic life, but also in prayer circles with new communities coming out of them, charismatic, mixed boys and girls, priests, nuns, it's all very interesting what was going on and still is. But one thing coming through in all of them was beauty, uplifting beauty. And this would actually draw off the streets lots and lots of young people who were heading for the pit of hell, otherwise in a spiral of abuse of substances and all that goes with it. Beauty. Just beauty. Now, going back centuries, more than a millennium, there is this story quoted by Benedict XVI in one sermon, that at the conversion and baptism of the future Russia at Kiev in the late 900s roughly, the people of that area, or even the emperor himself, the person who had authority to decide which way things would go, wanted to know which form of Christianity to adopt. And he sent envoys to different parts of the Christian world. They came back from this part, that, and that. And then one pair of envoys came back from Byzantium, Constantinople. And they said something to this effect. When we walked into this building, must have been Santa Sofia or somewhere in Constantinople, we did not know whether we were on earth or in heaven. So beautiful was what we saw. And the man said, that's the form we must take. And Russia became hugely Eastern in ritual. Of course, that was before the split, between Kiev in 1054. But it's interesting that beauty was a great evangelizer and healer. Still the case, right through the communist persecution, if they could get the liturgy, they had a measure of heaven on earth still, because that was unchanging. In Wales, we had a succession of very interesting interventions. It's a sad story how the Catholic faith was lost in the very Catholic country that Wales was. It was done through absence of priests. They couldn't get that far. It was anemia, basically, from the sacraments and the priests. It was that further away. So it became Anglican, but it didn't stop there. We had these waves of revivals. The Methodist revival, which is in two waves, the 1730s and the 1760s in Wales, which made it from Anglican Free Church. And then that happened again in the mid-1800s, and the last great one was 1904, 1905. What we find there? Beauty. And that too was a great evangelizer. I heard from my grandfather, now it's going back a while now, my grandfather was a young man at that time, not yet married. He would tell us stories. And he would tell us how the chapels would be packed. And you'd get your man, the policeman, next to the ex-drunkard on their knees in chapel, converted by grace and power. And you get things like this happening. Letters out of the blue coming years later to somebody, shops and whatnot, of debts they'd owed. In other words, consciences being moved. And the whole country was healed by prayer just before the First World War, when all these soldiers went and very few came back. At least they were going prepared. Providence is wise. And that is where I was coming from. Because I remember growing up, all these things that we had on a Sunday were very much based on the Word, preaching and so on. But there was one thing which kept us, even as children, interested in what was going on in the big church, not just Sunday school. It was when it came, the form, hymn and prayer sandwich. Those 4 hymns, they would take off and go into automatic polyphony, 4 voices, and repeat if it was going really well. Raising the roof and the organ putting all the stops out. It would bring tears to your eyes. That's what I was brought up in. Now, why am I saying this? We in Ireland have got used to half an hour, at the most 3/4, and very little in the realm of intervention. It's usually left to a choir, and fairly short. Who is losing? What's happening to our assemblies? Are they drawing? We think that we draw by giving short fare. It's quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. people need something other on a Sunday, not more of the same thing. Good music, ancient and modern, heals on every level. In our monastery, which was a strange kettle of fish actually, in Italy when I was transferred to from here, we'd kept, after deliberate choice, we were all young, they were all younger than me, except the founding prior, we kept Latin, because we knew if we lost it, we wouldn't get it back, because somebody just handed on, or the Gregorian chant. But boy, the shock that we got, it didn't at all put people off. We'd get about 500 on a Sunday, at least in the summer months, coming in busloads to see one of the only monasteries which kept the whole lot, with clouds of incense and the maximum, and the whole church with earthquakes of organ music as well. And I remember when it came also to young people, we didn't know how to handle these young people because it was like Taizé. We'd have hundreds and hundreds of young people camping in tents. What do we do with them? There were two schools of thought amongst the brethren. Do we give them a separate celebration of their own style, or do we bring them? It was very interesting to see how they reacted and how actually we were able to take them on. We allowed the two styles on a Sunday. They would have their own music as well, because a long celebration, about an hour and a half. There was room for everything. But the young people, no matter what their age, reacted, all of them, to authentic beauty. And when it came to my ordination, I remember it was up to me to give the choice of music for the things that we would use, and First Mass and so on. Actually, you were there, weren't you, at the First Mass? And we had, amongst other things, at Holy Communion out of my choice, because that was one of the pieces that we were able to do. We had a great organist and a great oboist, actually. He was the guardian of the church. His wife was our cook. We had, at Holy Communion, as one of the pieces, Albiconi's Magic Oboe, the one that comes in the Mission. And it was very moving to see that people, when that was played in Holy Communion, would quite often be coming up to communion with tears in their eyes. All ages. Music is not something which belongs to one generation and is not exclusive. True beauty is of divine origin and heals on a profound level. We are not exposed to our right as creatures to be healed by that great medicine God has given to humanity. We think they're going to attract by giving short fare. I'll just finish. The first reading talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. You know that the English translation has led to the expression fire and brimstone. That goes back to the translation that comes from 1611, the old authorized version which formed the English language as we know it. Brimstone, of course, is sulphur. But just about a year ago I was called to give a retreat in a Cistercian monastery in Italy, and I was taken off the train by a friend, and he took me up to the monastery on the mountain. But he'd stopped on the way, partly because he wanted me to hear his confession in a chapel which was always open. So I did, but he showed me there, just in that sanctuary, something which was very interesting. It was an opening into the bowels of the earth. From everlasting, from there, because it's volcanic, we had this stuff coming up from the bowels of the earth. Warm and sulphurous. Bad eggs, we call it. And if cats were around, they would be going, because of the heat there, to get warm, and they would be dying, and there'd be bodies of cats around, because they've been breathing in the fumes. But I was just listening in my mind to what was coming to me at that point. This is rather like having a gaze into the bowels of the earth on another level. The odour of horror. Because anything volcanic is going very deep down. It's going into where there's so much heat that it can't be but molten. It's escaping through these crannies. But those who, in modern drilling to get at oil and stuff, have been going very, very, very deep into the sea, have found that if you go beyond a certain level, you actually go into something which is not resistant. That means that there's something beyond the crust of the earth which is of a different order. And things have been happening there which have been puzzling even for scientists. Very puzzling indeed. Not only tremendous amount of heat, but also strange beings. And you can actually see them on YouTube's creatures coming out of nowhere with demonic gifts, able to eat into steel. It's quite interesting and quite frightening, but that's to say that we don't know exactly what's down there. But the fact that we identify down there something horribly, horribly dark, hot, ugly and smelly is for us some idea of what the absence of this divine beauty is. And this, my friends, is the crunch. A person in this world who already is friendly with ugliness, bad sounds, even bad music, bad words, blasphemy, aggressivity, unpleasantness, bullying, acts of meanness, ugly looks, even young people choosing ugly looks, even children liking vampires and all the rest of it, is interesting. It's not, I would say, just a tendency of children or young people. There's a sinister force providing an ugly norm as attractive and as the norm from a very early age. Beware. It's not the same reading things like Enid Blyton, Noddy, Thomas the Tank Engine, even later classics like Little Women and so on, with reading Potter. They're two value scales. There's something going on. There's something satanic going on in our culture. It's creeping also into our church. Why should we settle for more of the same thing in church? The noisy, the uncalming, the human. Celebrating ourselves with applause. God in the box, aside, not even thought about. It's a victory for someone. So as we come now to the altar, remember that our God is unchanged, and He, in His wisdom, has inspired the great giants, all the composers of the Counter-Reformation, Palestrina, and all the rest of them, and He wants us to give Him only the best. In return, He'll give us His peace.